Let me now say a few words on the urgency of this task. Firstly, we need to develop an Asian theology as Asia is fast developing on the world stage. We must overcome the current limitations facing the acceptance of the gospel in Asia. Otherwise, in the centuries to come, the Christian community will continue to remain only at the upper fringes of Asian society and will account for a very small percentage of the vast population of Asia. We need to learn from the policy inadequacies of the Western missionaries when they brought the gospel to Asia. They came on the back of conquering colonialists, and instead of adapting the presentation of Christianity from the rationalistic side to the relational side for a relational Asian psyche, they preferred to modify the relational psyche of the Asian. They become more like the Western rationalistic psyche so that the westernized Asian could better accept their rationalistic presentation of Christianity. They did this through the establishment of what we now call mission schools and through their institutional networks. Though Western education brought about great benefits to Asian societies in general, it had the unintended effect of limiting the spread of the gospel to mainly the upper strata of society, which is those who are Western educated. Hence, for more than a century, in Singapore at least, Christianity remained largely a religion for the Western educated upper strata of society. This resulted in only a small percentage of the total Asian population being Christians today, and more distressing, the observation that Christianity never became an indigenous religion in Asia. We must not repeat this same policy inadequacy when we bring the gospel to other parts of Asia. So often we are tempted to start Western-style schools, complete with buildings, Western curriculum, the guitar, and Western songs as part of our missionary work. And we unconsciously bring a rationalistic Western Christianity to the upper strata of society. We are doing to them what the Western missionaries have done to us. Now, don't get me wrong on this. Let me repeat. Don't get me wrong on this. We are grateful to the Western missionaries for their sacrifice. But we cannot help observing that their missionary policy was short-term and the easy way for mission work on the back of military power. However, it is inadequate to establish a church that could become indigenous and include all strata of society. At least for the Western missionaries, they came on the back of superior military power to establish local churches. We do not have this luxury. We have to compete with the great indigenous religions of Asia on equal footing. And we are further disadvantaged with a Western Christianity that does not fit the Asian psyche. Hence the urgency of the task for an Asian theology. As I said before, the gospel has a rational side as well as a relational side. Human societies have a dominant psyche, either more rational or more relational. We must use the correct side of the gospel as a point of entry to the matching psyche of the recipient population. Take the early day church as an example. The dominant culture then was Greek, which is strongly rational, though the government was Roman. An apostle who is strongly rational must be used. He is, of course, Paul. At Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus, the encounter was fully rational. Jesus appeared to Paul, and Paul was convinced that Jesus is Lord and is alive. His immediate response was very rational. Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? So Paul's commissioning was an act of rationality. Peter was different. Peter's commissioning was very relational. Simon Peter, do you love me? Asked 3 times over. Peter's character was more relational. So Paul carried a rational gospel to the rational Greek psyche amongst the Gentiles. We see this rationality very clear in Paul's letters. A rational gospel, however, is incomplete without the relational parts, and the early day church has to make that transition from rationalism to relationalism, and we see this happened. From Acts chapter 1 to chapter 5, the followers were called believers. However, from chapter 6 onwards to the end of the book, they were never called believers anymore. Instead, they were called disciples. A believer remains in a largely rational world. A disciple has made the transition to a relational fellowship with the risen Christ. If you read the book of Acts carefully, you will note that the instrument used in this transition from believers to disciples is persecution. The church in Singapore has not gone through the fire of persecution or even discrimination in order to hasten the process of transforming believers with a rational gospel into disciples with a relational gospel. This process has already started in some neighboring countries, and I do note the difference between the Christians in general in Singapore and those in these other countries. And I challenge you to take notice of this, the difference between the Christians in Singapore and those in the neighboring countries where Christianity has been discriminated against, or in some places, even under persecution. The second reason why this task of developing an Asian theology is urgent is more ominous. To put it bluntly, we need, for the sake of religious harmony in Asia of the future, to build an indigenous Christian church that can engage in dialogue with the great indigenous religions in Asia. This is the only road to lasting religious harmony in Asia. Today, it is difficult for Asian religions, which have successfully become indigenous in Asia, to dialogue with a church that, in their eyes, is only a transplant of a Western religion, and for that matter, a not very successful transplant. As long as the Asian church is not indigenous, other Asian religions will never take the Asian church seriously, but will view it with suspicion as an extension of Western religious culture. The current trend in almost all Singapore churches to copy the latest in Western forms of worship does not help. Indigenous Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism cannot meaningfully converse with a church that does not have an Asian cultural ballast of its own. Asia is rising, the indigenous religions of Asia are resurgent, and the time is short for us. But where do we begin? We must begin by drawing a distinction between theological education and theological leadership. Theological education involves the teaching of biblical truths and biblical theology. Theological leadership involves the development of applied theology that is integrated and comprehensive and that is relevant to the social psyche of the target population. It requires a sound knowledge of the social science of that particular population. Whereas there are many seminaries in Asia, especially in Singapore, catering to all shades of denominational or para-denominational colors. All of them almost today focus only on theological education according to their respective colors. We need to develop our local seminaries so that they can take on the theological leadership needed for a rising Asia. Just as theological leadership in the universities and seminaries of Europe after the Reformation led to the formulation of the rationalistic, systematic theology relevant to the New Age in Europe, today theological leadership in Asian seminaries, especially in Singapore, is needed to develop a new relational theology for Asia, which can then complement the rationalistic, systematic theology of the West. I use the word complement and not in place of or in competition with. We must recognize that there are attempts at promoting a more Asian face of Christianity in many seminaries scattered throughout rural Asia, but these are either very localized or narrowly culturalized. They are fragmented. We need an Asian Christian theology that is integrated and comprehensive, covering the main doctrines of the Christian faith, and that can cut across the many cultures in Asia and fit into the relational psyche of Asians. It is the duty of the local church in Singapore to promote the development of theological leadership in our seminaries, in particular TTC. This requires resources and years of commitment, but the task is necessary, the need is urgent. It is the responsibility of the seminaries, in particular TTC, sorry to keep harping on TTC, because I know the principal is here. It is the responsibility of the seminaries, in particular TTC, to undertake theological leadership for Asia and develop an Asian theology for Asia. TTC must be given the required resources by the supporting churches for this task. TTC is in a unique position to be able to spot young, promising theologians in the seminaries in Asia and develop and cultivate them and help them to see the wider need for a pan-Asian Christian theology. Our seminaries must distinguish between theological education needed as a part of basic pastoral training and theological leadership for Asia. Though both important, I would say theological leadership, because of its near absence today and urgency and long-term implications for the spread of the gospel in fast-rising Asia, must take dominance for the immediate future. Whereas theological education equips the pastor with the working knowledge to meet the current needs of the church, theological leadership, as you can see from the West, will determine the shape and character of the church for the centuries ahead. For the lack of Asian theological leadership for Asia, Western theological leadership developed to meet the needs of the West will continue to be the de facto determinant of the future church in Asia. This is going to be the stark reality we must face, and we must rise to this challenge. We want an indigenous Asian church for Asia. Failure to develop an Asian theology will result in a de facto Western rationalistic theology foisted on an unwilling Asian psyche and limit the attempts to indigenize the Christian faith in Asia. Christianity in Asia would then only remain mainly amongst the better educated upper middle class as it is today. With the rise of Asia and the resurgence of indigenous Asian religions, especially Islam, the task of developing an Asian Christian theology to build an indigenous Asian church is of paramount importance. This generation must begin this task. Let me next go on to the second part of my lecture, where I will touch on the infocom revolution. If we do succeed in developing a comprehensive Asian theology, we will always be faced with a challenge which the early day theologians of the West did not have to face. How are we to convey complex theological arguments to the current generation, and when the very foundations of communication have changed dramatically over the past few decades? Our hectic, fast-moving generation have developed a matching means of communication, especially amongst the young adults. No longer do young people have time to read long essays like the one I have here. Not even long messages. Any message on social media that takes more than about 50 words to express is seldom read. I have found that out. In fact, the use of catchphrases are often used to reflect the mood of the day. In advertising, for example, the catchphrase, "Just do it," invented by Nike, aptly summarizes the culture of the day. There is no time to ponder the consequences, no time to evaluate options, no time to hesitate, just do it. It aptly reflects the carefree urgency of a generation on the fast track. More startling than catchphrases, the use of abbreviations in short messaging systems is the cool thing to do. Ever heard of YOLO, Y-O-L-O? It means you only live once. I just heard it a few weeks ago. It is used when you embark on something risky, adventurous, unconventional, or challenges the moral norms of the day. Ever heard of LOL, lol? It means laugh out loud. It is used when some frustrating events have taken place. I'm sure there are many more that I've never heard of. If you think you can compile a dictionary of such words, forget it. They each have a shelf life and are discarded when their coolness have been exhausted by overuse and new ones emerge. It is a dynamic language with short lifespan of words, but they catch on because they capture aptly the constantly changing mood of the day. Now tell me, how do you convey deep theological concepts in such a language? Yet, unless we learn to use such language, we can never hope to reach out to the masses in Asia. With our conventional way of communicating, we will only scratch the surface of Asian society and remain an insignificant minority as we are today. Yet I believe all is not lost. We may never achieve the abbreviation level of the short messaging system, but at least we should aim for the catchphrase level. Consider the Reformation. How is the message of the Reformation to be carried in the language of the day-to-day man in the street? Luther coined this phrase, sola scriptura, sola fide. It means only by scriptures, only by faith. It captures aptly the essence of the Reformation for the man who cannot remember the intricate theological arguments of the theologians. It became the battle cry of the Reformation. Consider the social creed of the Methodists. John Wesley captured it aptly with the catchphrase, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Nearer home, consider the emerging ministry called the Marketplace Ministry, and I've attended many, participated in many. I spent some time pondering over it and tried to capture it in a slogan, and I thought something like this may be helpful to the uninitiated. Your work is your worship, your career is your calling, your posting is your parish. I tried this at a few speaking engagements. All understood it, but none can repeat it. I'm not good at communication for the young or the new generation, but I'm trying and hopefully will improve. There is an important principle at work in all this. I've come to understand after much reflection. Two things are needed. You must understand the psyche of the group, and you must be immersed, thoroughly immersed in the message you wish to convey. Being immersed in a message is important. It must be like fire in your bones, and it must be relevant to the spiritual hunger of that generation. You may have expressed this burning message in many lectures, sermons, discussions, but put them all aside. Then reflect deeply. What is that word with a capital W residing deep in your heart that you are trying to convey? Then try to express it in a short phrase. Try again and try again and again. After all, we have only one life to live, YOLO. You may be a theologian and not a modern communicator, but you can learn if you are driven by the need to reach out to the new generation. I'm learning as fast as I can, but I know I have my limitations. But we must each try, because the future of the church in Asia is at stake. What about relational theology? How do we convey it to the population in modern language? For example, if we accept the concept of God as our Father to be the starting point for a relational Asian theology, then how do we express the concept of God as our Father to a modern generation which sees self-sufficiency, and self-dependency as the mark of success in life? I spent many hours of solitude by the beach, immersing myself in this relational concept of God as our Father, until it became like fire in the bones and I was bathed with the Father's love. Then I tried to crystallize it into a catchphrase. And the best I could come up with is something like this: God is God when He is Father. I would explain it this way. We understand what it means when we say Federer is Federer when he is in the tennis court. It means Federer will draw all his tennis skills to the fullest when he is in the tennis court. His very self is expressed fully in the tennis court. God is God when He is Father would mean that when He becomes our Father, He brings to bear the fullness of His sovereignty and power on our behalf as a father would for the son He loves. God is God when He is Father will lead us to the supreme act of the Father in giving His only begotten Son, so that whosoever believes in Him will not perish, but will be blessed with the full restoration of a father-son relationship. I tried this on a few speaking engagements. Let me tell you the results. Only one man came up to me to say he recalled it, and even then he misquoted it. But we must not give up. We must keep learning the new way of communicating our message. This is a lifelong learning lesson for all of us. We have to adapt to the new form of communication, even as this new form keeps evolving. We have to play the catch-up game when the rules of the game keep changing. What a challenge. Not only is the form of communication changing, the technology that is used to carry this communication is advancing so rapidly. The handheld device you carry today will be obsolete in a few years. More foreboding is the advent of artificial intelligence with neural network that is being embedded in the software of your handheld devices. After months of using my new handphone is able to predict the words I want to use and offer me a selection of options to use. With sensors embedded, the day will come when my handphone will sense my mood for the morning and initiate messages to me to encourage me. Let's hope these are Christian messages for Asian Christians and not Western Christians. Let's hope these are not LGBT-tainted messages from the liberal West. Our children will be the most impacted. The church must therefore involve herself in these future technologies and ride the challenge for the sake of the Asian gospel. The issues surrounding the Infocom technology revolution we are going through are so profound, and we are not even ready with an Asian Christian theology to offer. In conclusion, so friends, The challenge we face in a rising Asia is twofold. We need to develop an Asian theology to fit the Asian psyche and hence build an indigenous Asian church. And we need to convey to the people in the communicating style they are using. We need to be involved in the infocom technology revolution and rise to the challenge. May the Lord grant us wisdom in this endeavor. May I end by thanking ETHOS once again for this opportunity to deliver the ETHOS Annual Lecture 2016. Thank you very much.